Hello, everyone. This is Daniel Halsey with the Global Earth Repair Conference, and we're doing our 24-hour global check-in. I'm with United Designers and Southwoods Ecosystems, Ecological Design, and I'm here with Sara and Regina from Spain. They're our co-interviewers, and actually have been a great help in putting this together and finding the people for us to talk to. We're going to talk about climate change, adaptation, and what's going on in the area, in this case with Milo. And Sara is going to introduce him.
Okay, hello. So I'm going to introduce you to Milo Bekins. He's representing the International Analog Forestry Network, and they are actually doing a great job in repairing the earth and working to conserve and restore the ecosystems, but I'm sure he will explain us everything much better than I will. So hello, Milo.
Hello.
Hello, Milo.
Hello, Milo. And
Nice to be here.
In Costa Rica, I think.
Yes.
Oh, you're in Costa Rica.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Okay, that's great. We're getting all over the world today, which is excellent. Talking to people. So my first question would be for you is basically as far as climate change has been going on for many decades, and recently I've even heard reports back when we were talking about it in the 70s, as far as greenhouse gases, things like that, the greenhouse effect. So. The first question basically is what trends have you seen from what things were in your memory to how things have changed to today to what direction they're going? What are the trends that you see in climate change?
So actually in Costa Rica, we have had many more events, large events of rainfall. And so I've been keeping a rain gauge for about 35 years, and every single day I go out and check the rain. And what I've been noticing is at about 2%, we've had more increase of rain, about 2% per decade. So that would be that's quite a bit of rain when we consider then on our farm we have an average of 6,400 millimeters, which would be in inches, something around 260, 270 inches. I'm not really sure on that. So you can see what the impact is. We see what the impact is in, obviously there has been deforestation. And so the rivers are overflowing when we have these big events. Just to give you a couple of facts, from 1935 to 1985, there were only 3 large events. When I'm talking about large events, it's over 250 millimeters of rain, which would be about 10 inches or something. And so those events have now, from 1985 to the present, we've had 7 events. So over these last few years, 30 years, we've had 7 events, whereas the 50 years before that, there were only 3 events. So that gives you an idea of what the scope is. And so that when we do have these large events of rain, that is what the farmer must do to conserve his soil. What he must do is obviously plant trees and to absorb that impact. With the deforestation going on, yes, we have much more erosion problems. And so as far as the trend in Costa Rica, we've had, in 1970, there was 26% of our forest was protected and still there. Now we have, with secondary forest growth, Costa Rica has 52% of forest growth, coverage. So you can see that we've done a very good job, the country has, in increasing the amount of forest coverage. And so that's pretty much the regional event. Obviously, Central America, each country has their own story as to how much deforestation goes on and how much recovering of their forest is happening. Forests are the only way to, obviously, landscaping landscapes are the only way to cool our effect of global warming with tree coverage. And so, so that's pretty much it, Daniel. Yeah.
And I remember when I was there, I've been there a few times, is also the restrictions on tree cutting are very severe. As I know people that they can't cut the trees on their own property without permission. And I found that very fascinating.
That's correct. If they hear one chainsaw coming, and they can take that chainsaw away so cutting the forest without permission is not done. That's why we've increased the forest coverage. And so, well, I can't say it's not done, but there is illegal covering, but it's not coverage, cutting, but it is not as much as, say, other countries, Brazil, Peru. And so we have passed laws for protection of the forest. And also one thing I can say is that has helped increase the forest coverage and decrease the cattle coverage would be the incentives that we get. We're the only country in the world that gives payments for environmental payment services. So we can get, they deposit in my account $6,000 every single year for me to keep that forest and conserve my forest, my farm. So that's a big impact when you multiply that. And it's only logical. This comes from 4% of the gasoline tax. So emissions are paying for our protection.
I see. So a lot of these things were instituted because Costa Rica has a great reputation, generally politically, and a lot of the changes that happened in its inception, as you know better than I do. So it seems like the attitude in Costa Rica is one that's about being stewardship of their natural resources.
That's correct. Another example of how we have adapted is there to climate change, or we are trying to adapt, is we have a national program of biological corridors. So we have a system of, I think there's 43 watersheds, major watersheds in the country that are protected and in this program. And so it's a social, it incorporates not only environmental protection, but we are socially and culturally protecting those rivers. Now, there may be communities within that biological watershed. However, the laws are protecting against deforesting along the riparian riverbanks.
So it sounds like initially these policies were way ahead of schedule, you might say. Are the forests able to absorb these rain events? With this new forest and the canopy coverage, is that going to be enough?
It's a start. I can't say that it's going to be enough, because you know what water does when it just is, tremendous raging. For example, we had an event last year but it has been accumulating over the last 30 years in our 7 events, large events. We had a rainfall that was up to 1 meter of rain in 48 hours, and so that brought down 2 hectares of virgin forest along the river, my farm, along the river bank. So really, it is difficult. It's a tough question, because whether or not it will absolutely mitigate that problem. However, it's a start, and with the if there's an overall program of reforestation, then we will have much less cattle growth, and there will, in our case, if we can sustainably have coffee fields that are diversified rather than just monoculture coffee, and with a few shade trees, that will help. And so in our case, as Sara and Regina know, that analog forestry, I'll get into that in my presentation, but when we start to diversify, and recreate a forest and the forest structure, then that will obviously help if it's on a larger scale.
Right. And so right now, as you see things going to more extremes, and we're kind of expecting that, the water may be more or less or more intense along the way. What do you think? Are there any other actions that can be done to avert a very serious tragedy for Costa Rica relative to climate change in general, based on what's happening to the animals, the wildlife, the ecosystems there? What can be done to avoid a tragedy and losing that?
Well, as I say, obviously I think restoration projects are imminent, actually. With the incentives that we get for reforestation and for conservation, I think that is a good start. Lobbying, my organization is lobbying quite a bit, the political institutions for a correct way of, I say correct, in the aspect of how we can improve our restoration techniques. So we are involved in our network in lobbying the institutions for which would be important, different institutions of like the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, and all their many offshoots, and to how the farmers can get to actually restoring their lands without having and with having economic benefits. And so if we're diversifying our lands, obviously we are going to being able to mitigate or adapt to those climate changes. Now, in other words, there's also a fact that there are certain species that grow at lower altitudes and upper altitudes. So we need to know what those species are to adapt better. As far as climate, the actual warming of the species, of the environment, those species can be used if we know how they relate to the altitude and the temperature. Then we can start to design those species into those new restoration projects.
Sure. So basically working with what we would call polycultures and basically integrating different species so that you have the resilience.
Correct.
In those systems. Great. Well, I appreciate that information. And then you have something to tell us about analog forestry.
Yes, I do. Let me share this with you, and so analog forestry, as the word says it, we are trying to replicate what the forest structure does in our design projects.
Could you push the presentation one so we don't see your menu on the side? Do the screen presentation.
Oh yes, okay, yes.
Yeah,
sorry.
And then you could, there you go, and then start from there so it has a nice clean screen. There we go. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good. And so the essence of designing, what are we trying to do? We're trying to replicate what the original forest structure does, the original ecosystem before man, and but yet allow the farmer or campesino, as we say, to actually benefit economically. So in our International Analog Forestry Network .org, we have, as you say, we have, I think that's a little bit dated, this map. We have about 30 countries, 30 organizations that are within our network, and in about 24 countries. Now, those organizations are autonomous, but they utilize analog forestry as the method of their individual restoration projects. And so we have in our network, we are going to provide we have 5 training centers, so all around the world. We have in Brazil, Cameroon, Sri Lanka, Costa Rica, and hopefully the next will be in España, in Spain.
Hopefully.
And so we can, with those training centers, we have 42 international accredited trainers. So we can train the trainers, as they say, and for the use of analog forestry and to increase the biodiversity and of their lands. And so this is important. And so when we start out as far as designing, what we do is we are going to obviously meet the structural requirements and the eco-functions of a forest. So it doesn't matter what type of forest it is, whether it's the Mediterranean climate around in the Mediterranean and around the world, or tropical or North American, European, that it doesn't matter. What we're concerned with is to try and replicate the original structure, and yet provide a polyculture, as you say, of crops. And so what we're doing is our basic triangle here is based on what the forest structure is, what the ecological functions of those trees and components of a forest, because trees are only in a tropical environment, trees are only 1% of the biodiversity, but make up 70% of the biomass. So the ecological functions of those components of the forest, they could be, in our case, it will be palms, herbaceous plants, trees, and epiphytes in the orchids, and etc., and vines. So we have to include that in our design. And so we basically map out for the farmer, and to teach him how to map out his farm. And then we are going to look at what the physiognomic formula, that means what the structure of a forest. All forests in the world have a structure. They all have different stratuses, different canopy levels, and those in the mature forest, obviously it's going to be more. And in the regenerate, and if we are regenerating a parcel or a piece of land, then we need to study that too, and to see what the structure of that degraded area is. Once we know that, then we can do an analysis of the gap analysis to see what is lacking. Using the mature forest as a model, we can adapt and plant in our nurseries what is lacking in the parcel that we are going to reforest. And so we're doing some mapping. We're mapping all the abiotic areas, like in roads and houses and things like that on the farm. We're mapping natural forests that may be on the land, and anthropogenic forests. This is what we are involved in, is basically an anthropogenic forest, creating a forest, a man-made forest, if you will, that is similar in structure and ecological function. And then we can also map the open land, to enhance. Mm-hmm. And so we also teach the farmer how to do an ecological evaluation of their lands and of their different pieces of degradation, so we can understand what is the soil quality the biodiversity aspect, what is the forest structure in those lands, and the productivity. And so with all of that information, this is for the campesino or the farmer. So we're not really doing a total scientific ecological study. What we're doing is for a study of the state of biodiversity on their farms. So when we get that information, we can actually draw up a spider web of all of these different aspects. And this will tell us what are our priority areas, where we need to work. If you notice the number, the higher number will be the better parameter. And then we can see here where we lack, there are certain mammals that are being lacked in the area, or vegetation. And we ask the farmer, what are the amphibians and other,
that's a great metric. That's a great comparative chart to have for a number of places that you could actually visually compare what's going on just from the shape of that.
That's exactly right, Daniel. And and so we can do that on each parcel, so we can understand. So if you look at the soil profile, we can improve our soil profile with composting, and the density with more sand or less clay, and the earthworms we can also do. So all of these parameters can tell us where you look at the structure. So maybe that was taken in an area of just pasture. So we need more structure in that area. And so this helps us realize what are the priority areas of which we have to work. And then it all of a sudden instantly gives the farmer what are his goals, or how is he going to work his own land. And so we do with them that in our workshops, just as we did in Spain. We did a brainstorming of with the farmers groups, and then so they can understand what are the short-term, medium-term, and long-term species that we can incorporate in our designs. So short-term, essentially, we can start harvesting within 3 or 4 months with the short-term crops. And then we have a whole list of all of those, the herbs, spices, medicinals, also, fruits, obviously. And then the medium-term crops, which would be which is chocolate, and in our case, it would be chocolate, black pepper, cinnamon, citrus, avocados, etc. And so then the long-term species are the trees that will give us an eventual structure. So we know the height of each one of those, and then the potential height of each one of those. And then we can incorporate all of those in our designs. Now you also see that there are, in a forest, in the tropics, there are palms and trees and epiphytes, which are the vines and etc. And so rhizomatics, those are very important. So when we understand what can be planted, then we can start to diversify our crops using our planting methods. And so it's all organic. We never we can't use well, they say can't, but we don't use chemical except for natural remedies. And so so in distinction of let's say permaculture, what we're trying to do as permaculture, we're trying to diversify our products and our crops. This on the lower left, on the lower right there, you see me in my former years doing essential oils. So all of my main objective. So let me back up and say that the design aspect is determined by the objective of the farmer. So in other words, if in that local area he has a good farmer, or he or she has a good market for certain crops, well then those crops will be their star crops, let's say. And so in my case it was spices. So we can, my aromatic spices can be made into, as a byproduct, essential oils. So we have vanilla on the upper left, we have cardamom, we have guarana, that's a guarana, that is the Brazil crop. Now, the way we get analog, it comes in, the way you have to forget about digital, and so the way the way the word analog comes in is that similar to. So in other words, the guarana, we have a guarana, the cupana variety of guarana, but it doesn't produce a commercial product. Whereas that same cupana variety species in Brazil produces a crop that is viable crop. So we can use that as, it is analogous to what was here in our original forest. The same way with cardamom in the center. Cardamom is a ginger, Inhiberaceae, ginger family. And so we have ginger family, a similar plant in our forest, and yet it doesn't produce the viable crop. So it is analogous if we bring that exotic crop to the Americas and utilize the market value of that crop. Now, obviously, the next question you're going to be saying, well, exotics versus native species. Well, as long as they're not invasive and that they meet the ecological requirements of a structure and function, then those exotics are viable.
So they still provide an ecological service and ecological functions as well as the crop.
That's absolutely correct. And so every tree or plant has their ecological functions, and functions to humans, or functions to for the environment and to the fauna. And so we can incorporate those exotics that may give us a better economic benefit, and yet meet those requirements of our forest and of our area. And so you can also see the rice paddies that we're making. We were totally sufficient in rice. We just had a bumper crop, as they say, as you say. We had unbelievable, but in 250 square meters, that's about 2,500 square feet, we got 54 kilos of rice in our recent crop. So that's enough for a whole year for us. And the vanilla, obviously, is a high-end product. And so we have, vanilla is an orchid. It's the only orchid out of 30,000 orchids in the world that gives a commercial product. And it's from Central America, so it's not an exotic. And so we can, so it meets the requirements of an epiphyte. And this is my wife down below bottling essential oils, and just a couple of more crops, the Annatto, which is a food coloring dye. The United States had prohibited a red dye #2 a few years ago, and so this is a red dye, natural food coloring dye. And rice and the patchouli for essential oils. So essentially we can, we're diversifying our crops, which will obviously benefit the farmer and the biodiversity of those crops. When we have biodiversity, we can increase the soil structure of a forest, we can fertility, etc. So as I said before, the landscapes are the only really way to help cooling our planet. Now, obviously, we can go cold turkey and eliminate the fossil fuels, but the actual cooling of the planet is done on the land, on our 30% of the planet's area. So that's what I have for you today.
Thank you.
those are a couple of our websites that you can look up, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you need be.
Well, it sounds like you have a huge amount of economic opportunity for people also with this system. It's not just about, the importance of restoring the environment and supporting the forest, but also at the same time, you have to be a steward of the forest in order to get your crop. So you have to kind of play both ends at the same time.
Well, that's the basic premise of our organization, and so that we're giving we're increasing biodiversity, and yet at the same time allowing the poor farmer in 5 continents or any farmer, it doesn't matter, to benefit from his crops and the diversification. We all know marketing is the hardest part of being a farmer, and so if we can diversify, and if the price goes down in one product, and we can obviously have another product that's coming on and it's harvesting perennially. In our case, we had with our botanical store, we have a little store, so we're eliminating the intermediary, and so we're bringing it from the farmer to the consumer. And so with our store, we have approximately 49 products that we can grow in and have in our store that will that the consumer, and we can take it right there. He or she can take it right to their kitchen.
Sure.
And also the Analog Forestry Network, in order to help the farmers to sell their products, they have created a level to give extra quality, like to the products, that is called Forest Garden Products, which it's a level that certifies not only ecological practices, it certifies also the increase of biodiversity, the all those things he just told us about. So it's very interesting label.
Right,
yes,
right.
And so Sarah, just let me add on to that. These are international standards, and it's the only international standard in the world that has been accredited by the IFOAM, the International Federation of Organic Movements, and all the rest of the standards organic standards in the world are either regional or national, and so these are the only national standards in the world that take organic that are beyond organic, and so we're diversifying. We're certifying biodiversity also.
How difficult is this to transfer to other areas of the world? I know you've been in Spain, but it must take a lot of research and a lot of effort to try and figure out what those other analog crops might be in different areas.
Okay, well, it's not so difficult, Daniel, because every organization that we work with are involved in restoring in their own countries, and so or regions, and so we have trained, as I say, 42 trainers now that can train the trainers. And so once we know in those individual countries what the species and plants and varieties that they want to plant, then the rest is easy. Then we can just start the nurseries and communal nurseries, and we recommend individual nurseries for each farmer. So that it's not so as much difficult as one would think, in that each organization is autonomous, and they're gaining their own, looking for their own proposals and their own money, and then they utilize our methods of restoration.
Sure. Well, this is fantastic. This is a great amount of information, and it's great to see, because analog forestry, I never really understood exactly what that was, and now I have a great understanding of what a great strategy that is for restoration, and basically having the returns of economic returns, environmental returns, and everything, people being involved with it, hands-on, and then also having a great amount of diversity at the same time. If you're growing rice and you're growing all these other things at the same time. And it also seems, it seems with all the things going on, there's a lot of human interaction with it, but also it seems like there's a lot of people employed perhaps, either in small scale, but if you're doing a large scale, it takes a lot of people to make that work, which is good.
Yes. And one thing I'd like to say is that all of our money now that we've done in proposals comes from Holland, and it is for gender equality. So we're obviously trying to empower more women into the game, and as for example in Cameroon, the women are those who work the land, and yet they cannot own the land. It's only the men who own the land. So we're trying to go to women, the women's rights as far as the nature and the water and etc. So I think that's an important aspect of what we're trying to do. Is obviously is gender equality is appreciating our mothers and the opposite sex.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, for sure.
That's wonderful, Milo.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you guys have any questions, Sara, Rina?
Yeah, I was just saying the same comment as you, Daniel, that we had several interviews today, and a couple of them, they were talking about the key being the people being connected to the nature. And in your case, also with Analog Forestry, you have said that engaging the people and getting the social and economic benefit from the nature is going to help to restore the nature. So I agree very much. I think that a lot of people is working in this direction, and I think that this is the key.
Right, and more people doing the work is more understanding. Then people aren't disconnected from it, and they also are invested in its success. So that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Milo, for your time, and I hopefully get a chance to check in with you sometime down there, and look forward also to looking up things that you have on the internet, and hopefully we can talk again.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Milo, gracias.
Gracias, Milo.
Adiós.
Adiós.
Hasta luego.
Adiós.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.